Welcome to the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network. This is season 1, episode 11, I believe. It might not be. I'm not exactly sure. I updated that. But we are presented by our partners over at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. I'm Joshua Perry, of course, joined by my guy, Christian Hackenberg. And we've got some really good, interesting football to recap from the weekend.
Purdue shows back up and proves they're the giant slayers, and anybody that's ever ranked going in there needs to buckle up because they're in for it, apparently, no matter what happened last week.
I mean, they got that thing figured out, and Illinois is the same way. Like, they might as well just play all of their games on the road against ranked opponents. Like,
I know.
Yeah, so we'll get into some of that. We'll also have some news that came out this week in the Big Ten for you as well, but we'll recap some of the scores from Week 9, starting off with the noon game. Ohio State 26, Nebraska 17. That was a really interesting one. We'll kind of dive into Illinois 14, Minnesota 7, a big upset in that one. Another upset, Purdue 40, Michigan State 29. And me and you have to talk about what went on there, because I think there's a common theme for Purdue when they're balling the way that they are. Wisconsin 52, Rutgers 3.
I was dead ass wrong.
You had that one as upset alert.
But I did also say It's either going to be tight or a complete blowout.
Yes. And
I will cover my tracks with that. But my boys let me down. Shiano let me down, man.
It's been a tough one for him. I love him to death, but it's a build for sure. Your boys, the Nittany Lions 31, Maryland 14, Iowa 17, Northwestern 12. That was a little bit of a clunker of a game. And then with the nightcap, Michigan 29, Indiana 7. Let's jump right on in to some of these games. Let's break some of these bad boys down. We'll start with that Purdue game. Again, the score was 40-29. Just some high-level notes. Aiden O'Connell, 536 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. David Bell, 217 receiving. That offense is very impressive. And I'm going to ask you a little bit about that in a second, because I want to get your thoughts on how they do things schematically. But the play calling was really good. You can see that they have athletes in space, and they got that matchup they wanted against the Michigan State secondary. And for Michigan State, again, the back end of their defense has kind of been the story this year. It's really the only thing that's held them back at all. And offensively, they're balanced, but they had a couple of critical turnovers, and they couldn't get the plays exactly when they needed them. But let me start off with this. We've seen David Bell now in the 2 games that they were able to get the upsets against number 2 Iowa and against number 3 Michigan State. He has been huge in those games. But I think it goes more to the guy that you talked about in last week's episode, in Aiden O'Connell, in his ability to run that offense. And they're an offense who's going to make you defend vertically and horizontally. They're an offense that is going to use a screen game kind of as a replacement for their run game, because they're not great at it. And they run a lot of 5-out concepts, meaning that the running back's not staying in. He's not even really check releasing. He's just out in the route, and the ball's coming out in rhythm on time. What is it that you're seeing from him that makes him so good right now?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Aiden. I love, first off, I love just how pure of a passer he is. I think his feet are phenomenal. I think his upper body mechanics are flawless. The kid spins the hell out of it. And I think a lot of it goes into his story too, why I'm such a big fan of him. The kid came in there as a walk-on, bet on himself, earned his stripes. And now he's been part of, probably even going back a couple years now, maybe 4 or 5 of some of the largest wins in the program's history, or at least recent history. And he's been a major player in all those games. I think he just shows up. I think the guys play for him. And he never puts himself in situations to lose the game. He just always seems to come up with a play when you need it. And that's the type of guy you need. And that's the type of guy you need at a place like that. Similarly to how we've talked about Nebraska, like, they need to get a kid like that. They need to get somebody in there that, like, the whole program's going to play for, go to war for, and always seems to put the team on his back when they need it. And he's done that. And I just can't say enough about him. I think he's a phenomenal player. I think he's got a bright future. I think he's got an NFL future for sure. Just with his body type, the way he throws the ball, the way he makes decisions. And I think a lot of the things that you're talking about through the scheme that he's playing in is preparing him to do that.
Yep.
And I think he's going to be a steal. I think he's a really, really good player.
From some of the folks that I've spoken to, he probably does have an NFL future. And for all the reasons that you mentioned, his ability to throw the football the way that he does is uncommon, I think, in the college football game. And here's the example for me. There was a play where they get all 5 guys out in the route. So the running back is just like, he's not even check releasing. He's gone. He's running a flat route. They got a couple of crossers, a couple guys going deep. And Michigan State, per usual, is running a 6-man pressure. And they like to run their 6-man pressures with a 2 under 3 deep zone coverage concept. And they got 5 guys essentially to block 6 dudes. And I'm telling you, he stands in there as long as he can. Guy right in his face, delivers the ball to a spot where he knows the receiver is going to be. And it was the perfect pass in the face of pressure. Like, things are going crazy.
That was early on in the game. That was like the first drive. Like, and what's funny is he beat that, and I don't think Michigan State kind of went away from that. After,
they did. They were doing a lot of straight rushes because the ball's coming out so quick. They can't get home with 6 guys. It's a waste, and there's obviously their secondary is bad. Like, you're killing yourself when you do that. Yeah. His game's so multiple. Like, even their offense, like you said, they have a lot of different multiple looks in terms of like. They let him work off play action, throw the ball down the field, but they also have that air raid, get the ball out, distribute it to the flats, catch run type game too. And his game just fits all of it. Like, he could probably execute in an RPO type system as well, just because of how sound he is from a technique standpoint and as a passer. And I think, like I said, it's just really cool to watch, and it's really cool to see Purdue, I think, really figuring him out as a player and what he does well, and putting him in those situations consistently. And when you have a guy like David Bell out there, that also doesn't hurt, you know? Yeah. So, I mean, and you mentioned the different offensive concepts. That's Jeff Brom as a play caller. He's going to be a guy who will do whatever it takes to attack scheme. And so the looks aren't necessarily all going to be the same from game to game or even throughout a game. But to your point, when you have a quarterback who is sharp and who is experienced and understands football, it really doesn't matter. You talked about the receivers. Obviously, David Bell is the guy that everybody's talking about, but they had a bunch of guys who caught passes in the game. Bell went for 217. Jackson Anthrop went for 80 yards. Milton Wright had 53. King Doru, who's their running back, had 60, and a lot of those were off of the screens. And then Brock Thompson, who is a transfer player, had 3 catches for 22, and it doesn't seem like it was a lot, but he had a beautiful catch in the corner of the end zone. And those guys are well coached. I watched their coach, Jamarcus Shepard, in preseason training camp, and they came out for pre-practice, and they're warming up, catching the ball. Guys were dropping the ball, and so he snapped on them, right? And so they go to the next drill, and they're still dropping the ball, and he's like, you know what? On the gun line. And so he had those guys running sprints before practice, and he jumped in with them too. They have a standard there for how they want their offense to be. And on the flip side of that, they got 3 coordinators on defense, and their defense is a lot better than they've been in years past. I mean, it's night and day the way that they're playing ball right now.
Yeah, I mean, they were super solid. And I think so I want to go a little bit. I think Michigan State played well enough offensively to win the game. I think the 2 things, I mean, they had almost 500 yards total offense, and I think you said it. They were very balanced. Kenneth Walker still played really well. That guy's special. He's explosive.
146 yards.
Yeah, I mean, they fumbled on their first series, I think, of the game, which when you're in a place like Purdue, you got to start fast. And I think the way Mel Tucker's teams, the way that this team is kind of wired is they need that momentum. They need that momentum to get going their way. And when you kind of get a little bit of a needle in the balloon early, I think they struggled to get back, but they did fight back. And then the interception in the fourth quarter, I think, was just a real kick in the nuts, because that was a chance. I mean, they took points off the board, whether it be 3 or 7, you take points off the board. And when you're in a dogfight like that, like, that's hard. Now, the one thing that I noticed, and you talked about that the catch that the one kid, what's his name? Brock Thompson had, right? When they got backed up, they seemed to be playing like that typical like bracket, like double 2 quarters type look. But even out in the field, when they went to that zone, once they got burned a couple times and they got back into the zone and they tried to cloud David Bell a few times, their DBs, even though they're in zone, yeah, there's an element of like reading the quarterback's eyes, but I feel like they rely too heavily on their eyes. They get their eyes caught in the backfield
all the time,
a lot,
all the time,
and it takes their eyes off the receivers and route recognition, and then playing the ball late, as opposed to just kind of. I think they try to.
Yeah.
Their eye discipline isn't great, and I think
they
that
got abused a couple of times in
them.
zones. Yeah, and I was watching the coach's copy of the tape. In the wide angle, I think shows it sometimes because you can really see some of the spacing in the back end there. And O'Connell, his ability to use his eyes to get guys off their landmarks was amazing. I mean, he was creating the open pockets in the zone. So I agree with you on that. When you play zone coverage, obviously your goal is to read the quarterback, try to steal one. But if you're a savvy quarterback, as you know, you can use your eyes to manipulate exactly where the coverage is supposed to be, and then you can create what the zone is not supposed to look like.
Yeah, I mean, but like even late in the game, there was David Bell ran a sluggo on the right side of the sideline, or the right side of the field going down, and he turned it into it was an explosive play, made a guy miss, and then ended up like tripping at like the 4 or 5 yard line or whatever. Yep. But they had the safety rotating down to double him, and his eyes were in the damn backfield.
Yeah.
And the guys already had however many yards throughout the game. So it just is like one of those things where I think I don't know if it's youth, inexperience, I'm not sure what it is, but I think those guys need to sharpen things up, because that is their only Achilles heel. I think they're a very, very good football team still, and they still have a lot of opportunities in front of them to still make their case. So
yeah, I mean, they're in control. If you look at the Big Ten East, they've got the win over Michigan. They got Penn State still out there. If they beat Penn State, they're in control. If they beat Ohio State, they're in control. Like, I mean, this is not a situation where you got to throw the whole thing away. You know, they got a lot of things to play for still. But you're right. If they can't correct the issues that they have in the secondary, especially even this week going up against the Maryland,
Ohio State.
Yeah, Ohio State. Like they got some challenges.
Some weapons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get into this Ohio State Nebraska game. Ohio State 26, Nebraska 17. It's really unique, because here's Nebraska again getting extremely close. They played their asses off in that game, especially on defense. I mean, those guys looked really good, but they couldn't pull it off. Their offense gained 175 yards on 4 explosive passes, which you talk about Michigan State secondary. Ohio State still got some questions out there too.
Yeah.
And their defense played well throughout the game, but especially in the red zone, they tightened up. They're able to turn CJ Stroud over. But I mean, kicking game's still an issue for them. It's been kind of the same thing, penalties, the whole deal. When you look at the Ohio State side of it, Ryan Day calls games like a quarterback sometimes. He loves to rely on the pass, and they called 26 runs versus 52 passes in a game where they had the lead, and especially situationally late in the game, you felt like they probably should have gone to the run. They didn't. And I think part of that is the offensive line hasn't been great the last couple of weeks. I said it earlier, defense better, still not sold. Bright spot, Jackson Smith and Jigba, 240 receiving. Dude was balling. So
15 receptions.
Yeah, it's crazy.
that's beating him, dude.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, they probably got the alert that Garrett Wilson was out of the game, and they said, all right, F it. We are going to make sure Chris Olave doesn't beat us. And Jackson was like, bet.
Yeah. Well, that's the scary part is like, and then even going down the line after Jackson, it's like that guy could go for 200. That guy could go for 200. There's like 7 guys in there that can all play.
Yeah, it's they got an embarrassment of riches at that position. But
gosh,
I'll start you off with this one. In terms of play calling, in terms of the flow of the game, what goes into the convention of a coach or a coordinator when the play calling balance is skewed so much to the pass?
It's just, I think it's really hard. I mean, obviously it was working, and I feel that it's hard to kind of abandon it. I think the one thing Ohio State's missing from last year with Justin Fields is the ability with the quarterback run, which I think takes so much pressure off the offensive line. It's another guy for the defense to account for. And I think that's something that hasn't been talked enough about. They haven't ran CJ that much in that type of manner. And I think that took a lot of stress off the offensive line. And now when guys are not really respecting that as much, it puts a lot of pressure on a young back and the group up front. So I think that could have played a little bit of an element in it. But then I think CJ as a passer, it's hard to take the ball out of his hand as well, because I think he's been playing really well in that role. So, I think they're going to go back to this. They got out of it. A win's a win. I think they're going to go back and learn from it. I think they're definitely, if I know Ryan Day, and I think I know him pretty well after just watching him and how he does things, he's going to scheme things up properly. He's going to get a balance back. And I think that's going to be a big emphasis for them, is being able to finish the game running the football and doing it in a dominant fashion, because that's something Ohio State's always been able to do. So I wouldn't say there's too much of a thought process in it, but it's tough. Like, as an offensive coordinator and a quarterback, when you're in a flow, and the guy still threw for 400 yards,
right.
He turned it over twice, but like, it's hard to take the ball out of his hand in that situation. And I think Ohio State feels that they still have the ability, as from a passing game, to be a possession passing game team because of the talent they have. So those guys can still win on underneath routes, get 6 yards, and keep the chains moving and stay on schedule from that standpoint. So a lot of the passing game has become extension of running games in today's offensive football now. So
for sure,
I think there's a big element of that there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Two things that you said that I want to comment on is, I agree. I trust Ryan Day as a play caller for Ohio State, and I think he's done a really good job. But there have been moments in his career as a play caller at Ohio State where he has been almost stubborn in terms of going back to the run game, even when it's been there. And the two situations for that were the Tulsa game from this year, where that was a front that was playing 3 down linemen. They were dropping 8 most of the game, like just run into that. And then last year in the Big Ten championship game against Northwestern, like finally when he decided he was going to let Trey Sermon go, he goes off for 270 yards. And then in the games where Ohio State's really struggled, I think a lot of it has been that the run game either hasn't been started or they've gotten away from it. So it's something to look at there. But you made a comment about CJ as a runner, and I'm a big believer in that. And it doesn't have to be the JT Barrett that Ohio State fans have come to know, where he's basically a fullback back there. It's just a guy who gets 2, 3, 4 yards and slides, and you take what the defense is giving you. CJ, after the game, was asked about his about not running the football, and he said that I get paid to throw the ball. He said if I wanted to run the football, I would have been a running back. And it's really interesting because last year against Michigan State, dude had like a 60-yard touchdown run or whatever. So people know he can do it. And I think I don't think the offense wants him to be that way. And I think that he would prefer to be a pocket guy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with that. And I think that's tough, but I think you make a great point. He doesn't have to be explosive. He doesn't need to be dynamic. He doesn't need to be Braxton Miller. He just has to be enough of a threat to where defenses prepare for it. And it's one of those things where, as a play caller, you might want to sprinkle in some of those things that you ran with Justin, and some of those things that go back in the tape and watch some of those schemes that you ran with Braxton and JT, and just sprinkle them in there once or twice, just to keep guys honest, just to have people prepare for it, because it only opens up everything else. And I think that'll help the whole process. Now, I'm not a big fan of that. Like, at the end of the day, like, yeah, you get paid to throw the football, but you also get paid to win football games.
Right.
And by any means necessary, if I got to tote that thing 50 times as a quarterback, I'm going to tote that thing 50 times to win the game. And it's just an element there that I don't agree with that. But, the kid feels how he feels, and that's his prerogative. But
I think he's been empowered to feel that way too. And it's just like, that's what the offense is. And I think that's totally fine if you want to be like that, but you also got to make sure the 5 guys up front are 100% on point, and that running back knows that he's going to have to create a little bit on his own if you want the offense to be like that. Final, I guess, 2 things on Ohio State. Just one quick comment, and then something I want to kind of throw to you, and then we'll hit Nebraska real quick, but we got them later on the show. So Ohio State's offensive line struggles with defensive lines that are on the move. When the guys are static up front, they can knock them off the ball. When the guys start moving around and slanting and stunting, it becomes a little bit of an issue. If you are calling plays, what kind of concepts work best for defensive lines that are on the move?
I'm a big fan of zone scheme just because a lot of it's track and eyes. And most of these defenses are super sound. Like the one thing that I see the high school level is you have guys that just start playing, and it's hard to tell a kid like, hey, if something disappears in front of you, something else is going to come there. No matter how, as a defense, if you're scheming a blitz up, if you're scheming a pressure, if you're scheming some stunts up, you still have to be gap sound, because if you're not, and they just so happen to run a zone right away from where you just stunted, it's a gash, like a home run. So that's where I feel comfortable. And it's usually easy for the offensive line to understand that, because like I said, a lot of it is just track and eyes and understanding and tempo of it, and being able to time when you get to second levels and things of that nature. So that's one of the things that I think is very easy. But like I said, if you're a zone team, you got to have elements of either play action in terms of like nakeds, getting outside the pocket to keep the backside ends honest, or outside contain honest, so you can get that backside cut. Got to have other elements of adding extra hats to the box creatively, whether it be through motions or slicing the tight end off the backside, things of that nature. So there's got to be some window dressing and some presentation at times. Sure. And that's not just thinking about Ohio State, like that's not something that you see a ton. I mean, they have it, but it's not a big staple. Like when I was playing for Bill, like Bill is a huge zone guy. So like we ran nakeds a lot. Like that was our baby off of it. We'd move the pocket. We'd make sure that those guys are staying honest. And a lot of times our big runs came from front side. And then that curveball, when everything flew over the top, that backdoor cut, because, I was holding the end with my fake, and we were able to slip it up the backside. So, but I think for an offensive line, when you have all that movement up front, if the defense is sound, that's the easiest way to go. When you start pulling guys and having to slam guys and go to the gap scheme stuff, the movement can be difficult, and you have to be on it as an offensive line in terms of communication and adjustments on the fly. And that's hard to do in today's game.
I agree. And they've been a lot of gap scheme. They're double teaming guys off the line of scrimmage, and they're using the pullers and everything. So I can see where defenses would definitely want to hit them with that. Final thing is, I mentioned the explosive plays that Ohio State's defense gave up. This is more for a Nebraska thing there. If you are Scott Frost and you understand that your offense has to boom off of big plays, what are you doing to make sure that you can keep those guys open downfield? Like, how are you trying to design plays up against defenses?
Yeah, well, the one thing that jumps out to me is you said the stat. They had 175 yards passing off of 4 plays. On third down, they were 2 of 13.
Yeah.
So when you're in games like this, you're minimizing your opportunities by being so poor on third down, and then you have to maximize the minimum opportunities that you create for yourself in order to be successful, it seems like. So that's one of the things that I would just, from a Nebraska standpoint offensively, is, just have your babies that you can stay on schedule with, and find ways to be in those third manageables, those second and shorts, which are shot opportunities, and even getting creative on first down, right? Like going back, studying your tendencies and figuring out like, okay, hey, maybe we're 70% run on first down, like the end of the year here, let's start mixing in some big play actions off this. Let's figure out ways. We got guys that can take the top off. So let's formationally make it look the same, and then start taking some shots off, and just be a tendency breaker within yourself. But ultimately, I think it just comes down to like a big emphasis on staying on schedule and figuring out a way how to be a little bit more efficient on third down, whether it be making it a little more manageable or whatever it may be. But 2 for 13 you're not going to win a lot of games that way. That's going to be hard to do, especially if you're so reliant on the big play.
Losing football for sure. Let me tell you about our sponsors over at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. If you haven't signed up yet, Bet Rivers is offering a $250 match bonus for your first deposit. But what sets them apart from everyone else is that they require just one playthrough to turn that bonus into cash money. With their new Rush Pay instant approval, withdrawals are not only fast, they are safe, secure, and reliable. Go to betrivers.com today or download the Bet Rivers iOS app must be 21 years or older. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Element in football that I think a lot of people overlook at times because everyone expects so much out of us as players, and we're supposed to be well-oiled machines, and we're supposed to do this, and we're never supposed to make mistakes. And I just think it was a little bit of a letdown top to bottom offensively for Minnesota. And if I'm PJ, where you're at in the season, it's hard to go back to the drawing board and start saying like, all right, this is what we got to do. Like, no, like you guys have created somewhat of an identity of success. Let's just start holding each other accountable a little bit more, heading forward into this, and just pound execution into these guys' brains moving forward, in terms of what they've been doing, because it got them there. They were rolling last week, like everyone was so high on them, and then I think it was just a letdown in terms of the human element with not showing up. Like they just didn't show up, and that's, like I said, that's part of it. And I think it's oftentimes a part of it that gets overlooked by a lot of people in the media and the fans and things of that nature. So I wouldn't panic. I'd just go back to, all right, this is who we are. Let's establish it, and let's make sure that we do it in the manner that we need to do it in order to win football games here to finish up the season.
Yeah. And to build off of that, if I am a Minnesota coach, one thing I'm doing with that offensive line is I'm showing a bad play from the game, and I'm showing them doing that same play perfectly from a different game.
Yeah.
And I'm and basically let them know like what you were a week ago is not what you guys actually are. And I think that is an easy fix. And the guys are probably going to really feed into that off of a bad performance to make sure that they're continuing to get better. And you mentioned Tanner Morgan. Like, I love that kid. I think he is what Big Ten football is about. Been through a ton of personal adversity. He's been a guy who's been through the ups and downs, and he just keeps swinging. But he's got to find ways to elevate his team a little bit more. We've seen what he's like when he's elevating his team. It's ridiculous. But this year, he's had a couple of really good performances, but outside of that, it's been kind of up and down for him. So to stabilize and to kind of just ride the wave and not get too high and not get too low, I think would do a lot of work for him. Yeah,
I think that's a great point, and it's great advice. And I agree with you. I mean, the kid's played a lot of ball. Like and that's the thing, is like we're sitting here talking about this. That offensive line and him both know this. They both knew that probably walking to the podium post game for things. So like we're not telling them anything they don't know, because you and I have both been in those shoes.
Yep.
But just as part of our job description right now to analyze it. And I think it's cool that you brought some really good points up, and I tried to bring a little bit in terms of just the perspective of what's going through their brain, because they know it. Like all of them know it. So it's just got to be one of those games where you kind of flush it and keep it moving and get it ready for next week.
100%. This is one that you don't show too much of the game tape, and you just get over it and get back to who you are. And I think that they can do that. I love the mentality of that team. They're resilient. They've shown that throughout the year. I think they got a chance to finish strong here. Let's change gears here, get to some big thoughts. The news that came out yesterday, I think, was pretty interesting. We've talked about Scott Frost and the situation at Nebraska at length on this show. And Nebraska decided that they were going to retain Scott Frost at least for another year on a restructured contract. And that contract reduces his pay from $5 million to $4 million, with the extra $1 million going to replace 4 coaches that they fired on Monday. And those coaches together made about $1.775 million. So the total pool for the replacements is going to be about $2.775 million. His buyout will also drop from $15 million in 2022 to $7.5 million. So this is one of those situations where we kind of saw it at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh, where it's now a little bit more favorable for the athletic department to kind of set the table for some moves. I think it's a little bit of a signal there, but also for Scott Frost, it gives him a wonderful opportunity. $4 million is nothing to sneeze at. And the fact that you can take the extra money and hire quality assistants is a really good thing for him, because now he could say, if we want to pay an offensive coordinator $1.2 million, we can do that. And we can hire 3 other coaches for, $500 or $600 a piece that are going to be quality coaches on that offense. It puts him in a position to basically call his shot now, because if he misses on this, then they can walk away and say that we gave you the opportunity, you didn't do it. If he can turn this thing around, he is going to be in the greatest position ever, because fans still love him. Fans love his commitment to the school, and they have belief that he can get this to a place where they're competing in the West.
Yeah. I think and we talked about this from a funding standpoint, from a facility standpoint, from a tradition standpoint. In the West, they're probably the strongest program from a resource standpoint. It's just been lacking on the field now. So I think you make a great point. I think this was a great move by the athletic department in Nebraska. You say, hey, we're giving you this opportunity. We're laying it to you on a platter. But if you screw it up, we can now dump you. And I think that's a great position to be in if you're Scott. And as long as he takes it the right way and he does the right things moving forward now, he can take full advantage of it. And it's a second. You just got hit with the defibrillators, man. And right. I think it's gonna be good for him. I hope he gets it moving in the right direction, because I really do think that they're just a couple pieces away. It's not. Yeah. I don't think that it's going to take this crazy, scratch everything the last couple of years here. Yep. We got to go back to the drawing board. I don't think it is. I think it's just a couple of missing pieces. Yep. And if he goes out and he puts the time in to find those pieces, I think he'll be in a great situation.
I don't disagree with you at all. And you talked about how close they are. They have 4 losses to top 10 teams by a combined 22 points. That's the margin for them. And all of their changes came on offense because their defense has played well enough to win games this year. That is a defensive unit that I think is really good. They have showed up in big moments against good teams and have done a really good job. And so they're really not that far away. And the other thing that you can say, and I think this is probably what really swayed the decision for Nebraska, is that their players have not given up on this year. They haven't quit at all. Because they've been so close and they continue to fight. And the story came out that JoJo Doman's playing hurt and he had an interception in the game. He was all over the field. Adrian Martinez was playing with a high ankle sprain and a broken jaw. And he is still fighting for his team and for his coach. And I think that means a lot to people who are evaluating the situation there. Because if you had players who were saying, all right, well, you know what, I'm just going to pack this thing in. We're not playing well anyway. I'm just not going to show up for games. I think this is probably a different call that they make. But the fact that they see that the players are still engaged and that they're still fighting shows that the players are believing in Scott. And so they want to believe in him too.
Yeah, it's not a cancerous situation. And that's a good evaluation by the athletic department, understanding what they needed to do. Unfortunately, in this business, heads still have to roll.
Yeah, they do.
And you feel for those 4 assistants, but I think that shows a commitment that Scott has to be able to make that tough decision, because that's not something that's easy to do. And I think you've seen it in the past. Doug Peterson stood on his pedestal and stood in his sinking ship over some of his assistants and the decisions that he was going to have to make. So I think it just shows Scott's commitment to saying, hey, I'm gonna ride this out. I'm gonna do what I got to do. Hey, I love you guys, but this is my school. To your point, the guys are playing for me. We got to make some changes and we got to get things going the right way. So I think he made a great move on his side by not fighting that and understanding the situation. And like I said, I just hope he approaches it the right way mentally and does it the right way and gets the right heads in there that are gets the right guys in there that are gonna ultimately make a big difference for him.
Yeah, and I'm pulling for him. Obviously, you never want to see a coach fail, but also for the conference, when Nebraska is good, I think it's good for the Big Ten in general, and I think we all appreciate that. Yeah,
they need a power over there. They need someone to take it. Wisconsin's been close, but they're still like this year they showed some inconsistencies, and they've traditionally kind of been those players in the West since that whole split happened. So they need a couple programs that can sustain it, and I think Nebraska is one of them. And if you have Nebraska and Wisconsin fighting over there, and then you have your wild cards with Iowa, Purdue, and Northwestern kind of being cyclical and figuring things out, I think it's going to, like I said, I think it's just overall health of the conference going to be really good for it.
Yeah. And part of this is Scott Frost is going to have to recruit well. And that's why you make a decision like this with the timing. And that gets into this next question I have for you is your feelings on the timing of coaching changes in football now. Because we're seeing coaches who are getting fired as early as week 2 in the season And a lot of these changes are because of the earlier signing period, where athletic departments have to show recruits that they're going to make the change, and they have to be able to go on the road with the new staff and meet the commits and make sure that those guys are firm, but also pull some other commits that may be tied to other schools into the program before that December period. And I understand that aspect of it, because a bad recruiting cycle can really hamper a program. But the thing that stands out to me about this is a lot of times it feels like a program is punting on the current season and punting on the current players in the locker room. And I think that's where a lot of this conversation has to be had.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's so hard, man. And there's become so much pressure because of so much media attention and so many demands from fan bases now. Like I feel for those guys, like college football, that whole like, and that, just even going bigger picture, like that's why I'm happy that the whole shift with the NIL and all those other opportunities for these kids has gone that way, because the rest of the machine has kept growing, right? Like the rest of the machine has the expectations have been set, the standards been set. People got to win now. There's no time to develop. There's no more like, hey, come in here, like get your culture going. Like you can miss a couple times, like it'll be all right. Like we believe in you. Like that stuff's out the window. So I think the NCAA and college football in general is really bringing everything full circle and moving it forward. The recruiting element though is tough. And I think that there is also the element that you're dealing with college kids. You're not dealing with professionals. You're not like, there's so many distractions. There's so many other factors that play into it. So the coaches, I wouldn't want to be one of those guys. Like it's really, really tough to be in that situation and all of the other things that you really don't necessarily have a ton of control over, no matter how much of a drill sergeant, how much of how much demand you put on your locker room. They're still going to make mistakes. They're still 18-year-old kids. And there's a lot of things that go into it. So the timing of it's hard, because you do have a little bit of a responsibility to be a developer of men at that point. And that's getting lost with this turnover, right? It's now becoming business decisions for kids. Once National Signing Day comes up, it's a business decision. So it's just the shift, man. It's the shift of college sports, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it. But everyone's got to adjust. You got to adapt and overcome at all levels.
Yeah, it's really hard. And you mentioned the timetables for coaches now, where it's really, year 3 is when people are like making their evaluation on your tenure. If by year 3 things aren't going the way that you feel they should be going, people are already talking about you're on the hot seat, you should be fired. Whereas probably a little while ago, you had some more time to really get things figured out. And it's a really unique equation. And you mentioned some of the factors with NIL, transfer portal, there's so many moving pieces to these decisions that I don't want to be an administrator. I would hate to be a coach right now, just because of all of the things that they have to be focused on. It's kind of wild, but it's tough if you're thinking about players in a locker room and you come in, say, like week 7 of the season, and you're being informed by the AD that your coach is no longer your coach. Like, that's got to be a tough pill to swallow, because your mind from there probably goes to the point of like, all right, well, this season's done. Like, which bar am I going to go to after this team meeting, because we're not playing for anything anymore?
Or like, oh man, you start DMing all those guys that were talking to you during the recruiting process, transfer portal, like you're bringing it up. Like, it's just become such a free market now, and it's hard. To hit a home run as a hire, you need to have a guy who's an X's and O's guy who's going to develop the players from a football standpoint, but you're also going to need a guy who you get a lot of kids from a lot of different backgrounds to buy into. And those guys who are really, really good X's and O's wise, and then who are also just really, really good at relating to everybody, that's a unicorn, man. There's only a few of them. And I don't even think guys like Saban are that. But I think what Saban has benefited from is the fact that he established a culture early on, however many years back now at Alabama, and that machine just feeds itself, and he just has to be the figurehead, right? And he has so much turnover with his assistants. He has so much turnover with all these other things. But all those guys go on to get head jobs and really good head jobs. And now you look in the SEC, like everyone seems to be a Saban disciple in some way, shape, or form. And it's like he just kind of timed it right. And I feel like even in today's world, if Saban was taking over a program, I think it would be really hard to establish the type of program that he established. So it's just different, man. Like the expectations are different. It's hard to do it. Like you have to really, really hit a home run from a hiring standpoint. And there's just not many of those guys out there.
Yeah, no, the hiring is definitely difficult. And in your point about all of the things that a head coach needs to be, and the hardest part about that is like, if you're a coach who's not an X and O guy, you have to hire the right coordinators. And if
they got to stay around,
that's the deal. If they're good, they're going to be gone. So then you have to find the next guy who's a great coordinator. And it's tough. So it's really interesting. It's the changing landscape of college football. Final thing for this segment, I wanted to touch on this because it's really interesting, but it also it lends itself to a bigger conversation. So Jim Harbaugh,
I think lends itself to a little bit of this conversation.
It does
to a degree.
To a degree.
So go ahead.
But Jim Harbaugh was asked in his press conference on Monday about some of the calls from the Michigan State game. And he said that he got feedback from the Big Ten that they made the wrong call multiple times, specifically the play where they overturned the Aiden Hutchinson touchdown, which was a huge swing in the game. And so there were some people whose initial reaction was, why is he still complaining about calls? And he's done this before in X, Y, and Z. I think that's unfair characterization. He was asked the question. He answered the question. Mel Tucker was asked a question about a questionable call in the game against Purdue. And he said that he doesn't blame officiating for anything and that it makes a program soft. And so you've got these two coaches and it's very petty, kind of doing their things and it's their personalities. But where I'm getting at with this is there's a little bit of an officiating question going around college football and in the Big Ten, because you watch some of these games, and not to go too hard on it, but you sit back and you're like, wow, like how are they not getting this right?
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is you just wonder, like, all the technology now, all of the eyes, all the camera angles, it's almost like you have to try to screw some things up. Like it's not old school, like it's part of the game. That's another human element in the game. Like, the guy sees it, there's no instant replay. Like that's all gone. Like you have every tool at your disposal to get things right. Let's get it right. Or to Mel Tucker's point, if we're just going to accept the fact that these referees are not going to be willing to let that human element go, and people oftentimes don't understand. I mean, there's bang bang plays that happen every single Saturday,
right? And
those guys, you can sit there and do as much training and you can watch as much tape as you want. Those decisions are still really hard to make, and they can be monumental decisions. So, it's almost like you feel bad to be in their shoes, but at the same time, there needs to be kind of like, I don't know if it's checking ego at the door or the whole officiating needs to go back to it and say, listen, we have these things to get this stuff right. Let's just do it the right way. And let's use these things. And if you didn't see something, like, let's go to it. Like, we got enough TV timeouts. The games are long enough anyway. Like,
right.
Who cares if we take another minute and a half to make sure that we get it right, to just leave no doubt. I think they can definitely do that. So I think the officiating as a whole needs to decide, like, hey, listen, we either use these to the fullest of their ability, or you got to stop it. Like, I feel like you can't toe the line of like one thing or the other, right? Like, it has to be like, you either have to go all in or be all out. Yeah. And it'd be stupid for them not to go all in just because of everything that's at stake. I mean, realistically speaking, with now the money and all these things that are going into it, and the school getting funding for bowl games and championship appearances and stuff like that, the amount of money that's getting thrown around is too large to be sitting there saying like, hey, it's the Zebra's fault. Like, they got everything to get it right. Like, they need to get it right.
I agree with that. And it's interesting. I think that if a play goes to review and they get it wrong, that is the most egregious thing that can happen in a game. And there probably should be some sort of accountability. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but the judgment call, bang, bang plays, it's one thing. The ones that you review and you still can't get that right is mind-boggling to me. But I heard somebody say this, so this is not my idea, but they talked about how some coaches are up in the box during a game because they have a better view of football from being elevated. And they mentioned that there should be an official that is in the box that can literally, like they do it for targeting, that can buzz down and be like, hey, you missed an egregious pass interference down there. Like, you should throw the flag. And they should be able to kind of go back and confirm, like, yeah, this was a pretty bad one that we missed. Like, that should be a factor too. And I say this because I'll take my Ohio State cap off for a second. In that Nebraska game, there was a pass interference on a third down that was missed. That was obvious. It was crazy. Everybody could see it. They didn't call it on the field, and it ended a Nebraska drive. Those are the plays that I think that if somebody was up there, they could be like, hey, bro, like, you literally have to call that. Like, everybody saw it.
Yeah, it's almost like, go back to the fact that, like I said, there's so many dollars getting thrown at this. Like, just put two teams in there, and like you said, have one team in the box or something like that. Give them their own section with some nice warm coffee. You know, hey guys, you guys had some action on Wednesday night. It was balls cold up in Toledo. How about you guys come up here? You sit up there, you watch the game, and you have that ability to radio down. And I just think it's just about maximizing the resources, and they have them out there. It's just about maximizing. And I think there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me who could probably figure it out. But if you and I can sit here and in 5 minutes give some pretty solid suggestions, in my opinion, I think those people have the capability to do the same. And I think they should. Like I said, there's just too much at stake.
There's a way to get it done for sure. All right, last segment, we'll get some previews coming up here. We got a couple of games this week. Starting off, Rutgers at Indiana. Indiana is favored by 6.5 in that game. I think this is a matchup game for Rutgers, and this is not to poo-poo on Tom Allen's outfit, because I love that team, but it would really feel good if we saw Rutgers winning this one.
I agree. I think it would be really good for Rutgers, and I think this is this is an opportunity for them to show some growth, specifically offensively, to be able to score some points, because everyone's, for the most part, been able to figure out a way how to do that against Indiana throughout the year. Defensively, with the exception of last week, I think Rutgers has played fairly solid throughout the year in the Ohio State game. I think they do match up well. Like, when you just look at the rosters, if you put two teams on paper and you say, all right, like, what does this game look like? I think it matches up very well. So, you know, I don't necessarily know if they might win by 7. They might, but I'd be more comfortable with it being like a 3-point game or like a 4-point game.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's what it's probably going to end up being.
I don't disagree with you on that. Michigan at Penn State, and your boys are favored by 1. What do you see happening in this one?
I'm so bummed it's a noon kickoff. I mean, slow start against Maryland, I guess, get you some noon kickoffs here down the pipe. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, Penn State, it's just the last couple of weeks. I mean, really since that Illinois loss, it's just seemed like, outside of Jahan Dotson, they're having a really hard time creating offense. I don't think it's for a lack of pieces. I still think Yursich is trying to find himself as a play caller up there with what he's got. I still think the offensive line and the toughness up there and the ability to run the football is an issue. And I think that's not for a lack of talent either. I'm not going to challenge their manhood, but it might be scheme. It might be, I don't know. I haven't watched enough of it, but they got to figure something out, and they should have figured something out a long time ago. And then we talk about Michigan. I mean, Michigan's a really good football team, and if Penn State's not careful, Michigan can get up on them quick, and it could be scary. So I think if Penn State comes out fast and is executing offensively, and they're figuring out ways how to take some pressure off of Jahan, still put him in situations to make plays, but also take some pressure off him and have somebody else show up as a threat, whether it be that tight end room, which is deep and has some talent, or some creative ability to run the football. You know, go back to the Auburn game, bring in some unbalance, bring in some play actions off that, and work it in there. You know, that's something they can do, but they're going to need to come out fast. And if they do, I think it's going to be a really good football game. I think defensively, both defenses are fantastic, and they're going to present their challenges. So we'll see what happens.
So let me ask you this question, and I don't know if this is an obvious answer to you, but who is this game bigger for?
Well, I mean, it's massive for both teams, right? Like if Michigan wants to continue to have a chance to go win the East, they got to do it. I think Penn State's in a really tough spot with the Ohio State loss and really the Illinois loss. I think they still could have been in a little bit of a driver's seat with just the Iowa loss, but that Illinois loss is such a kick in the balls. But if Penn State wins this one, I mean, they can still go out and play in a Rose Bowl, which I think would be good for the program. So it's not obvious to me. I think both teams have a lot to gain from this game, and both teams need it. You know what I mean? I mean, both teams really need it. So
yeah, that's where I'm kind of at. It's interesting. You mentioned Penn State, like they get this one, they still got Michigan State out there. And now the conversation becomes way different about this team and about this year as you look back on it. But if you're Michigan, like you said, all their goals are in front of them. But this is also the type of game where if Jim Harbaugh can't pull this off, people are going to be extremely critical. Like this is going to be one of those things that they try to use against him. And so I almost feel like for Michigan, obviously with everything riding on it, it's big, but just from that standpoint of Jim Harbaugh in games against some of the powers in the East and in the West, like you got to pull it off.
He's had a really hard time against Penn State the last few years too. And I mean, you know it, and you can speak to this as a guy who's walked into that stadium. It's tough to play in Beaver Stadium, man.
I mean, they're lucky it's November and this isn't a night game. You know, like because playing at noon,
if it was a night game, it'd be completely different.
Totally different.
Yeah, but I mean, they'll still get rowdy at noon. I mean, that place.
Yeah, I know they will.
Up, so, that's a factor that I think is going to play a big role. And I always say, like anytime you're in Beaver Stadium and it's a game that's getting some press, the fans are going to play a factor in it
for sure. We'll jump ahead here to Northwestern at Wisconsin. 24.5 is the margin there for Wisconsin. Graham Mertz has been a lot better these last couple of weeks. I mean, his game against Rutgers, and obviously it's Rutgers, so you take it with a grain of salt, but threw for 240 and 3 tutties. Like, you know, if he can replicate something close to that throughout the rest of the year, it's a very dangerous team that they got.
I agree. I think Wisconsin needs this one. I just don't think Northwestern has it offensively right now to be able to pose a threat. And I think Wisconsin wins this one pretty handily. But I mean, 24 points is also a lot. But you know, if they come out and play the way they did last week, obviously they can cover that. So. Yeah, I mean, I think Wisconsin rolls here, personally.
I do too. I think Northwestern going against that Wisconsin defense, you mentioned it, terrible matchup, absolutely terrible matchup. And then Northwestern's biggest issue has been their run defense, and Wisconsin is going to run the football. Like that, this is just the matchup in this game is not favorable at all if you're Northwestern.
Yeah.
Minnesota at Iowa. Iowa's favored by 6. In this last game, Spencer Petras, the Iowa quarterback, went out and he was banged up throughout the week. And so I think that was part of it, but also he wasn't very productive. And if you're Minnesota in a rivalry game, coming off of a loss, I feel like their mentality is going to be on point. And so 6 is not a big number. I'm just very curious if Iowa can move the ball enough against Minnesota's defense, because in the game against Illinois, the defense wasn't great in the first half. That was not the issue. And I don't like Iowa's offense.
Illinois scored 14 points. And I know Illinois is what they are offensively, but I don't think. I mean, to your point that you just made, I don't think Iowa's playing great offensively right now. I think they're a little lost. They're struggling. There's not a lot of confidence on that side of the ball. That whatever confidence they had after the Penn State game was very quickly taken away. And I agree with you. If Minnesota does what I think PJ Fleck's going to do this week to that team mentally, they're going to come out ready to play. I think Tanner's going to definitely be playing with a chip on his shoulder. It's a hell of an opportunity for that team. And I think that question that you asked me of which team is going to want this more, or which team is going to view this as a bigger game, I think Minnesota is going to view this as a much bigger game. You're going to Kinnick. It just seems like it's one of those things where PJ is going to really do a great job of painting that picture for the team, and they're going to be able to rally, because I don't think that they need to make adjustments. They just need to play better. Right. And I think Iowa is at that point where they're really searching right now. They're fishing for answers, and they are kind of in that adjustment phase of like, we got to figure out something here. Like, our bread and butter hasn't been working offensively. The quarterback's banged up, and I think he's limited anyway. So yeah, I think Minnesota wins this football game.
I don't disagree with you. I think this is one of these games that Minnesota is 100% going to show up for, and Iowa's in a little bit of a precarious spot as of right now. Purdue at Ohio State. Ohio State's favored by 20.5. I'll say it right now. I don't trust it. I'm not totally bought in that this defense is fixed. I think they give up entirely too many big plays. That's something that Purdue can do. I think Purdue has one of the best playmakers in all of the country on defense, and George Karlaftis, and Ohio State's offensive line has been suspect the last couple of weeks. This is a game that Ohio State probably should win. This is a game that I think they will win. 20.5. I don't like that number at all.
I agree with you there. I think everything you said. I think Purdue, the way they're playing the game right now, it's just hard, man, because after the Iowa game, we're giving Purdue all this credit, and then they get, what was it, Northwestern? They go play Northwestern or something like that. It's like,
Wisconsin. It was Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin just backhanded them, and it's like, I want to, like, everything in me is telling me, like, all right, like, Purdue's got this, but we'll see. I hope they learn from it, but I agree with you. I think 20.5 is a big number. And I think as long as they come out and still find ways to get David Bell the ball and take the top off, as you said, Ohio State's been susceptible to some big plays, and Purdue's been taking advantage of it. So I think as long as they do that, finish in the red zone a little bit better than they did in the Michigan State game towards the end of the game there, finish in the red zone. I think if they can do that, I think they can definitely cover. But I do agree. I think Ohio State should win this game just from a talent standpoint.
With you on that. And then finally, Maryland at Michigan State. Michigan State favored by 12 in this one. And I will say that Maryland is banged up at the wide receiver position, but Talia Tungavailoa does not give a damn about that. He threw for 371 in their last game against Penn State. And Penn State's a secondary that I think is really good. Michigan State secondary is nowhere close. And so that's going to be the question. It's two things. Is Leo's probably licking his chops right now, looking at the tape of Michigan State secondary. But these are also the games where he tries to do too much, and he starts throwing interceptions. And he's not a guy who just goes out there and he'll throw like one interception when he's pressing. He's going to throw 3 or 4 of them. And that's the thing that I worry about. But this is a matchup that I'm not certain that Michigan State is just going to run away with.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's that matchup that you just highlighted is the matchup of the game. If defensively, they can get a couple turnovers, they're probably going to give up some big plays. But if they get a couple turnovers, I think offensively Michigan State is very dynamic. I think Kenneth's going to do his thing again. Because that guy's playing his way. I mean, he already has it, I think, but he's going to have a seat in New York.
Yeah.
I think Michigan State has that momentum, and I think Mel is going to go back. I think he's a great coach. That's going to be a big focus for them, is the defensive backfield and figuring out ways how to put them in situations. I think he learned a lot about pinning the ears back, and I think there's going to be a lot of sound coaching from them on the defensive in the defensive secondary in terms of, listen, guys, like just don't just don't do what you did. Don't get burned. Just, I don't care if you got to catch rally, like let's live like that. Let's get the ball in our offense's hands and let them control the game. And I think that's ultimately what they end up doing.
I 100% agree with that. I think Mel is going to have the adjustments on point. He's that type of coach where I think he is critical of his roster, but he's more critical of himself. And so he'll have some answers. It'll just be curious to see what those answers look like. But that, my friends, is a wrap. This is the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network, presented by our partners over at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. Again, Joshua Perry, my guy Christian Hackenberg, and we will be back next week with the best analysis of Big Ten football. Stay tuned.